Well, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me today. Again, Joe Raycraft with the SBA. I'm with the Office of International Trade, as you see. We do some very specific things for companies that export overseas. Hearing from some of the new businesses doesn't sound like a lot of exporting activity, but hopefully we'll give you some ideas that maybe you can start a second business to maybe start exporting back to some countries maybe where you have family or friends. So the Office of International Trade is, we're part of, you've probably all heard about SBA's 7A program. That's our lending program, and that's delivered through commercial lenders and commercial banks for businesses that need financing. So the Office of International Trade, we have 3 specific loan programs that fit into that. So we're kind of a specialty niche. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, but I'm also going to talk about some of the general requirements of SBA. That's for any business, whether you're an exporter or not an exporter. These are just some of our general, general rules and requirements. So I always like to start off with this slide in terms of exporters. Almost 42% of U.S. exporters have smaller than 19 employees. A lot of people think that it's only large companies that are exporting, and yes, that's true. A lot of large companies do export, but SBA is the Small Business Administration. We support a lot of small businesses that export. When I say small businesses, that means single member LLCs that might have a specialty, and we'll talk about some of these, may have different specialties in exporting lumber or wood products or agricultural commodities or different types of foods. So, we support kind of the gamut. And again, just to kind of interest you in maybe thinking about exporting, you probably know this intuitively, 95% the consumers actually live outside this country. So there is a big market out there. Certainly the U.S. is a large market, and it's a very good market, but it's always good to diversify your revenue streams, and that tends to help make you a little bit more stable of a business. It helps you kind of deal with some of those ups and downs of sales. If there's a slower period here in the U.S., maybe exporting can help offset some of those things. So I'm just going to talk about the first line here. How do we define what is an export? How do you become eligible as an exporter? And what it is it's really defined at the top here. It's a transaction. It's a transaction. It's the production and payment associated with the sale of goods or services to an overseas buyer. So you can see I have sale of goods or services highlighted. Selling goods, we all think of goods, but there's plenty of services out there that are exports. And I was talking to I just a few minutes ago, and I know he does some kind of digital video and that type of thing, and we actually finance a company in Maine that does exactly that, and they've got contracts with some media companies in Maine, in Europe. Some of the other things we do, companies that are involved in like military and defense, we can support those exports. And then there's no U.S. content rule either. So let's just say you're importing goods and you're selling them here in this market, but you also get demand from other markets. Even if you're importing from South America or maybe Asia, you can import those goods and re-export them, and you still qualify as an exporter. It doesn't have to be U.S. made. It's just you're a business. You're kind of facilitating that export. So we want to support that. Really, the only restrictions we have in terms of countries, these are the countries where U.S. businesses are prohibited from doing business. And there's 4: Cuba, Iran, North Korea, and Syria. Now there's other rules and regulations with other countries, but these are the ones where it's actually illegal for a U.S. business to operate and do business. So this kind of gets back to what SBA, what is SBA and why is SBA important to small businesses? We don't provide direct financing to businesses. All of our loan programs are delivered through the banks. So you would go to your bank for a business loan, and your banker may say, okay, we can help you with that. Maybe you need short-term working capital for inventory purposes, or maybe you need to buy a piece of equipment. Your bank may say, yeah, we're happy to make a loan to you, and we're gonna make an SBA supported loan. You may hear that. And the reasons why lenders use SBA is because there's a certain, let's call it, weakness in the application. And typically the weakness tends to be collateral. So if your lender is gonna make a loan to you, they wanna make sure that they're fully collateralized. And with small businesses, a lot of times the business doesn't own their own building, they just lease space. They have desks and computers and just furniture types of things, so it's not a lot of collateral to support a loan. So that's where a lender, we see collateral shortfalls. That's really the number one reason why lenders use the SBA program. And that allows a lender to actually make the loan. Without that SBA support, the lender wouldn't be able to make it. So these are just some of the examples of why SBA is important to small businesses. Change of ownership, like a business acquisition. So as you grow your business, maybe you find another company that's a little bit different than yours and you're considering acquiring it. That's a very big use of an SBA program because it's a risky proposition for a bank. You're buying a new business, you don't really know how that business is going to operate, you don't know the history as well, so there's some risk there to the lender. So they do tend to utilize an SBA guarantee for that. Startup businesses, we do support startups, new businesses, or franchises. Those are all good reasons to utilize an SBA loan. Sometimes what you're purchasing or what you need financing for, you need a longer maturity. You need more than 5 or 10 years. You need 25 years. Maybe it's a piece of real estate. Again, sometimes lenders aren't willing to provide those terms, and through the SBA we can. Or the last one is, it's kind of just outside the lender's credit policy, meaning, maybe it's an industry they're not very familiar with, and they're just more comfortable moving forward with an SBA guarantee. So these are the general eligibility requirements for SBA. I always put this one first. It scares a lot of people. Banks are always going to ask for a personal guarantee, and a lot of you probably already know that, having gone and received financing for your business. So the SBA requires it. The banks have to get a personal guarantee from any business owner of 20% or greater. If there's several people that own the business and they're all, less than 20%, doesn't mean there's not a personal guarantee. SBA requires that there still has to be one person at least that personally guarantees the loan. And again, just to kind of talk about what does it mean? What does a personal guarantee mean? There's something called an unsecured personal guarantee or a secured personal guarantee. An unsecured personal guarantee is just you sign and guarantee. It's that moral obligation that if the business is not able to produce the cash flow to repay the loan, you're saying that you're going to do everything you can personally from your personal assets to try to repay that loan. So it's not a secured guarantee. A secured guarantee is if the bank also asks for some additional assets for you to pledge on the loan. So they may say, hey, we want you to take your house, and we want you to provide a second mortgage to us on that house. That's a secured. So if something happened with the business, it wasn't able to pay, you weren't able to pay personally, the bank could go after your house. They could liquidate it to get their payment. So there's a big difference between unsecured and secured, but be prepared for an unsecured personal guarantee whenever you're looking for bank financing, whether it's SBA or not. It's just very common. And these are the other kind of eligibilities. There's got to be a reasonable assurance of repayment, SBA, as I mentioned before, we're a cash flow lender. We're looking at the cash flow of the business. We don't really care that there's not a lot of assets there or a lot of collateral. We're okay with that. We just want to make sure that it's a solid business. It's producing sufficient cash flow to pay the loan back. Again, we talked about collateralization. We want to collateralize it as much as we possibly can. Also want to see that the borrower has some reasonable equity invested in the business, some of their own cash, a little bit of skin in the game. That's really important. And when you do go to your lender to obtain a loan, let them know, hey, I'm going to put up 10%. I'm not looking for 100% financing. I'm going to put up 10%. I'm going to put up 20%. Make that very clear, because that's important to a lender. A lot of businesses will walk in and say, I need 100% financing, and that's not it's not really reasonable. And the lender's going to say, well, that's going to be difficult. We're going to need to have some equity. We support for-profit businesses only. Not-for-profits are not eligible. Applicants must be located and operate in the U.S. Businesses have to be at least 51% U.S. owned or 51% owned by legal permanent resident, and not delinquent on any existing debt obligations to the government. The most common one would be like student loan or student debt. If you had a student loan and you weren't able to pay it, it's in default, that would preclude you from SBA financing. This is the Office of International Trade and what we do, and it's not unlike the other parts of SBA. The first part, business intelligence, that's really kind of what your organization does here. We introduce you to lots of different resources, and I know you already mentioned SCORE advisors. We work with SCORE very closely. We also work with the small business development centers, and they're excellent organizations for assisting with business planning, writing a business plan, or maybe kind of revising your business plan. Maybe you're growing and you're adding a new product line, or something's changing with the business. You need to kind of you need to update your business plan. SCORE and SBDCs are great resources. We also have, and I'll provide some contact information towards the end of the slide deck. Again, on the international side, we have the U.S. Commerce Department. They offer a lot of services for companies that are exporting. They can even help identify customers overseas. The second piece is grants to reach international buyers. There's, we call it a STEP grant program, and I'll get into more detail. It's grant funding that provides exporters with about, in Massachusetts, it's up to about $10,000 a year per company, and it helps to offset specific costs that kind of help provide more incentive for businesses to export. And then lastly, financing, the specific export financing that a company may require when they're selling overseas. Again, business intelligence, this is kind of our ability to connect you with different resources and resource partners. We have a toll-free number. We've got internationalsba.gov email where you can ask any questions. If you are exporting, you have anything specific, specific questions, specific problems, we can usually help. Oops. So this is the STEP grant program, and the STEP grant it stands for State Trade Expansion Program, and it really is to provide incentive to small businesses to export, whether they're new to export or whether they're an existing exporter. And again, I misspoke. I think Massachusetts is up to $15,000 a year. But some of the expenses that are eligible for the STEP grant is participation in international trade shows or trade missions, designing of international marketing materials. Maybe you need things translated. Maybe you need to do some translations on your website or internationalize your website. Those are costs that are eligible. I mentioned the U.S. Commerce. They've got a lot of different services. Those are typically pretty low in cost, but still you can offset them with a STEP grant. Again, any sort of export-related training, IP protection, if you've got a product that's patented, and then also the cost of product compliance testing. So if you're selling a product and maybe you're selling into Europe, there's specific testing requirements you need to comply with. And again, they can be costly, so this is a great use of the program. So here at the bottom, there is a link to the program here in Massachusetts and the application process, and then the contact information for two of the folks that are involved in that. And actually this week I just added this slide. There's a virtual webinar this week, September 20th, and it's going to talk about, again, the Massachusetts program. And the reason why it's in September is because our funding, the government funding, runs from October 1st through September 30th. So this is for next year's program, starting October 1st. And I believe Massachusetts received something like $400,000 or $500,000 for their STEP grant program.
Hey, Joseph,
yes?
Anyone can access to the webinar? Or
Yeah. Anyone can, yep.
To register?
What's that?
You have to
Yeah, there's a register link. I did put it in here. So if you go to I sent everyone the slide deck. So if you just go and register, or you can go to the msbdc.org.
To register.
So I'm not going to go really too much into these. These are our export loan programs. There's 3 specific programs, and SBA has probably, a dozen different financing programs. It doesn't really matter to the small business. This is really up to the lender to determine what's the best program for you, depending on what your financing need is. But again, we can provide lines of credit, short-term lines of credit that can be used for working capital purposes. So if you're needing a line of credit to buy inventory that you're going to resell and export, that's a short-term line of credit. Or let's say you're more like a manufacturer, you're making items and you need equipment and you need to buy a piece of equipment. That would be term financing, where you could pay that off over, let's say, a 5 to 7 year period. So that's really what these 3 programs do. It just depends on the size of the loan. Again, this is for smaller companies up to $500,000 maximum loan size, and we do a lot here. Again, we do lots of like $50,000 lines of credit to small immigrant-owned businesses that are exporting. These 2 programs are up to $5 million. They're much larger. But again, they do the same thing. It's not like they're doing anything different. It's just that the loan size is significantly higher. And I just have here our fiscal year 24, starting October 1st, there's no fees on any SBA loans for up to $1 million. So typically those fees can be up to like 3%, 3.5%. So it's a good time. I'm going to skip. These are just more detail on these programs. I'll just give you a couple. I got 2 examples here. I always learn best through examples. This is the one you and I were speaking about. This is a New England company. I see television production. What they do is they do video and documentary work. And again, the small company, it's a husband and wife operation, and they landed a contract with a European media company to provide like documentary and video services. So that's their product. It's really a service. And again, they were what we call asset light. They didn't really have a lot of collateral. They had video cameras, they had leased office space, they had desks and chairs, but they didn't have significant collateral to pledge. And what they needed was about $100,000 of working capital to help pay the operating expenses while they were working on the project. And they also needed some term financing to buy some cameras and video equipment. So we made them 2 separate loans, a line of credit for $100,000 and a term loan for $75,000 for the equipment. And this company also utilized a STEP grant program when they attended a trade show. They attended a trade show in Miami. It attracted a lot of international companies, so they were able to use that. So that's just kind of one example of how our programs used. Another one, and I got a few examples here with food wholesalers, other types of commodity wholesalers that are selling, different types of products. So in this case, the company needed, fairly large line of credit, $300,000 line of credit, in order to purchase that inventory that they needed in order to sell it overseas. So we were able to provide them with the finance that they needed. And this was also, again, the company that utilized a STEP grant for attending a trade show. But I've got companies that export, lumber products. Again, they're just a wholesaler. They buy and sell it. Seafood, frozen seafood, lobsters, agricultural commodities, rice and beans, and then even some plastic type products. So it really runs the gamut, and these are companies that, they're single member LLCs, or they're, much larger companies with 20 or more employees. Export business planning, I won't get into this too much, but it's important for you, even, not even if you're not an exporter, but business planning is important. So I would certainly encourage you to have a relationship with a SCORE advisor or a small business development center, just because they're good advocates to have. You can bounce ideas off them. They can help kind of put a package together. So when you are ready to go to a bank for financing, you have a nice presentation to provide the bank. What do you need to apply for an SBA loan? So these are the key items. The first one is just an SBA form 1919, just general information about the company and the owners. Very simple to fill out. I think might be 10 pages long, but a lot of it is fill in the blank and check the box. Background information about the owners, personal financial statements, because we know there's going to have to be a personal guarantor. Business financial statements, typically that's tax returns. Maybe you also work with an accountant to provide financial statements. Those can be provided. Details about the ownership of the company, who are the owners, if any business licenses or certificates are necessary, what's the existing debt that the company has. I always like to have a resume, some background on each owner, and then an overview of the business, the history, how long have you been in business, what are some of the opportunities, what are the challenges, and why is the, what's the purpose of the SBA loan? Why do you need a loan? And this kind of goes right into that, how to prepare for a discussion with your bank. And I'm not going to read through it, but again, this is more for a company that's preparing for export financing, but it's relevant to any company. Again, I just think it's important when you do go to a bank for financing that you have a strong business plan that the lender can review and feel comfortable with. Now, when I say business plan, everybody thinks, oh, they want a 50-page document. I don't have time for a 50-page document. I was a lender for 25 years. I don't want to read a 50-page document. 3-5 pages is enough. It's plenty. Be very specific. Be focused on what your business is. Give background on it. Who's your customers? Who's your competition? Kind of go through. And there's lots of different business planning templates you can look at, but it doesn't have to be 50 pages. It just needs to be, just be very focused and brief. Trying to think if there's anything else here I want to comment on. I always say too, when you're going to go to your lender for financing, has anyone ever watched Shark Tank? Anybody watch Shark Tank? If you haven't, just watch a few episodes, and that's how you want to approach a lender. You want to walk in knowing they want to make sure you know your business, you know your product, you know your costs, you know your profit margins, and you know your customers, and be confident about it. And they're gonna ask you these questions. You don't have to worry about the equity side of things. All you're worried about is can I get this amount of money to achieve whatever purpose it is you need to achieve. So I always like to use that analogy. And this is a good slide for an SBA resource guide. And this is, it used to be printed, but now it's just, it's an online version. But it's a really good guide for, again, connecting you with the SCORE advisors of the world, or the small business development centers, or getting a little bit more detail on the different products, or, you know, like a business planning template. All those things are here on our resource guide. Again, these are the export assistance resources that are here in Massachusetts. But again, these can be relevant to just domestic business. SBDC, your SCORE mentor. This particular person, Michael, he's out of the Boston area, and he's more specific for exporting, but you can go to SCORE's website and find a mentor very easily. Here's the contact for the STEP grant funding, or the U.S. Commerce Department and their services I kind of talked briefly about. And then the Export-Import Bank of the U.S., they're a good resource for something called credit insurance. And when you do begin exporting, if you're providing credit terms to your overseas company, your overseas customer, let's say you're giving net 30 or net 60-day terms, you can use an insurance policy to insure against non-payment by your customer. So again, it's just a little bit of a trade, a little finance tool that can be really helpful for companies doing business internationally, especially if they're providing payment terms to the overseas buyers. And that is my last slide, my contact information. There's Carlos Hernandez. I don't know if you know Carlos, but he's in the Boston office. He's a lender relations specialist in District International Trade, but he knows all the SBA programs, so you can always feel free to reach out to me or Carlos directly, or anyone else in the office. So I'll take any questions. I hope I didn't bore you guys too much with the export stuff.
Thank you so
Welcome.
much.
Thank you.
Good.